Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And I'm going to do a couple videos today about great early 70s rock bands that are obscure, but collectors know about them. And the whole reason I'm attracted to bands like this is because I grew up as a teenager in the mid to late 60s and the early 70s. And I loved all these bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and the like. And then you get to another tier of those kind of bands like Sir Lord Baltimore and Budgie. But then there's bands that really fell between the cracks. And because of that, all that Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Budgie and all that resonates with me. Of course, I went on a deep hunt for all these kinds of bands that came out in that era, and there was a ton of them. 1970 and 1971 was a golden age for heavy bands, and so everybody was doing it. And a lot of these records were either imports only, released in Europe, or they just were really obscure and just fell between the cracks. And the one thing I find is that I love that kind of sound so much that when I come across these obscure gems, I'm just thrilled. I just can't get enough of that classic 1970 to 1971 sound with the heavy guitars and the blues shouters on vocals and massive riffs and the like, and a lot of high energy. So that's basically why I started this channel to talk about bands like that, because I love that stuff. Here I am, nearly 70, and I like a lot of newer bands, but I just love these old bands and that old sound. And a great example of that is a group called ASHKAN, and they put out one album in 1969 called In From the Cold. I still remember the day I came across it. I'd never heard of them. I had no idea about them. And in about 1982 or so, I'm flipping through the racks at the used record store here in Seattle, Cellophane Square. And I see this record, and they're obviously a heavy band. I'd never heard of them at all. And the cover looked really cool, these damaged looking guys hanging out in front of a windmill. And it was on Sire US. And that intrigued me even more. How could a band that came out on Sire US? Of course, a lot of stuff that came out on Sire US was pretty obscure. They were a major label, but a lot of these bands they signed, there was limited pressings and wasn't much press. And of course, back in those days, we didn't have the internet and YouTube and all that stuff. So you basically had to dig up records by yourself and surprise yourself. So anyway, ASHKAN came out, formed in 1968 when Bob Weston and the drummer Terry Sims, who used to be in Black Cat Bones, and they were a major band in the UK at the time, and a lot of connections to that band have popped up in a number of my videos. But the lineup of ASHKAN was Steve Bailey on vocals, Ron Bending on bass, Terry Sims on drums, and Bob Weston on guitar and mandolin. So that's another reason why I knew I was going to like the record when I got it. It's just a three-piece band with a singer, and I knew I was in for the goods, and I really was. I got the album home, and I was blown away. And the fact that they had a connection to Black Cat Bones wasn't something I found out until a lot later. But Bob Weston is a pretty interesting character. Not only is he a killer guitar player, but he ended up replacing Paul Kossoff, who was originally in Black Cat Bones. So when Paul Kossoff left, he replaced him in Black Cat Bones. And Rod Price actually came into Black Cat Bones after Weston left. Of course, he was in Savoy Brown and Foghat. So that's another thing I like about bands of this era. There's just all these connections, and I love these family trees. But Bob Weston also used to work with Long John Baldry, and in 1972 was in a band called Ashman Reynolds. And then most famously, he joined Fleetwood Mac in March of '73 and was on the Penguin and Mystery to Me albums. So he ended up being fairly successful after ASHKAN. And ASHKAN played a lot of shows and were a reasonably successful band in the UK. They had the same producer, Ian Sippen and Pete Shortster, who did Sam Apple Pie and Clark Hutchinson. And so the album is recorded really well, which just makes it that much better. And ASHKAN sound is definitely in the vicinity of Free or Clark Hutchinson or Savoy Brown. And so that excellent production really adds to the record a lot. And one of the notable things, of course, is a three-piece band with a vocalist. And there's lots of good over guitar overdubs on there. So the record's pretty full. It's definitely a great studio effort. So they were pretty much had a high profile in the UK, had notable players for bands in the UK, got top-notch production for a band in the UK, and it really shows. And the record itself is really strong. The original songs are really killer. There's a lot of great guitar work, solid rhythm section, and the singer Steve Bailey, he's right up there with all those great British blues shouters like Pete French and Paul Rogers and that like. He's very convincing, and so he really adds a lot to this particular record and this band. Because a lot of these bands are really excellent bands, but sometimes they fall flat in the singer department. But ASHKAN's not one of them. He's definitely a top-notch blues shouter, and I love these British bands that morph from blues bands into heavy rock bands or play just heavy rock blues. And in this case, ASHKAN is that. They're basically a blues band that just started integrating more things that started being associated with hard rock and proto metal in the early 70s. And ASHKAN is just a giant record, and for that reason, as far as I'm concerned. And they have a few moments where they slow things down a little bit, like a lot of these bands. But for the most part, it's pretty much pedal to the metal all through the record, and just cool arrangements, great rhythm section, killer guitar player, definitely an excellent singer. So they got all the goods. They check all the boxes, and one of the records of that era. If you're looking for obscure bands that really had it all going on, you couldn't do much better than ASHKAN. And kind of like some of these other records, I'm not surprised it was released in Decca in the UK and they were a top-notch band. But sometimes I scratch my head what American record companies were thinking when they brought a record out like this in the US, because it's definitely something that had a lot more appeal to the UK market. They just were more into this kind of stuff, and records like ASHKAN actually charted in the UK, unlike the US. But US Sire took a chance, just like they did with some other wacky UK bands like the Deviants. So they were definitely trying to create a market in the US for some of these obscure British bands, and didn't go too well. But man, I'm sure glad we have this ASHKAN album, In From the Cold, from 1969. That's the other thing, the fact that it actually sounds like something from 70 to 71, but the fact that it came out in 1969 makes it all that much more impressive. And so they're a top-notch band in my book. So I'll post it below as usual and check it out. So if you like Savoy Brown, you like Clark Hutchinson Band, you like Savoy Brown, you like Led Zeppelin, you like Leafhound, any of those kind of bands, you're going to love ASHKAN if you haven't heard them before. Thanks for watching. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching my channel. I Hate Rock Music.